Hello, my name is Jonathan Schlecht, and I have researched Common Core and will present my findings in this PowerPoint presentation for my Educational Technologies online class. I will first discuss what Common Core is by defining it, looking at the development process, and finally looking at the adoption process. It's a very controversial matter, so I will examine arguments for and against it, as well as alternatives to it. Lastly, I will explain how the last presidential election will affect it. So the official Common Core website defines it as such. The Common Core is a set of high-quality academic standards in mathematics and English language arts and literacy, also known as ELA. These learning goals outline what a student should know and be able to do at the end of each grade. It was created so that all high school graduates would attain the skills and knowledge to succeed in college, their career, and just life after high school. So just as a kind of timeline for Common Core, the first draft of Common Core was in March of 2010. Common Core was officially released in June of 2010. And the majority of states adopted it in July of 2010. 44 states adopted it officially November 4th, 2011. The development process was a state-led effort launched in 2009 by state leaders. The standards are informed by the best state standards already in existence, the experience of teachers, content experts, states, and leading thinkers, as well as feedback from the public. And that information was according to their website. 24 people initially wrote these standards, and out of the 24, none of them were identified as classroom teachers. Rather, these people were mostly representative of the testing industry. But this did expand to 101 people, but out of those 101 people, only 5 identified as classroom teachers. And this is not according to their website, but according to outside sources, mostly outside critics. But teachers were involved in the process, and it was mostly through feedback, not developing the standards. Teachers served on work and feedback groups. Teacher organizations gave feedback to the standards. They had members of teams for regular feedback while they were being developed, and teachers provided a large amount of input during the 2 public comment periods before they were officially released. Now, initially, 46 states adopted Common Core, as well as the District of Columbia, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, the Northern Mariana Islands, the American Samoan Islands. Now, of these 46 states, 18 of these states adopted verbatim, which means that it's adopted just as it was written originally with no alterations. The other states adopted them, but with some modifications. And Minnesota is unique as they only adopted the ELA standards, not the math standards. And the 4 states that didn't adopt them at all were Texas, Alaska, Nebraska, and Virginia. Now, in my research, I found it really hard to have kind of a set number of states who currently have it or do not have it. But I did find that 4 states have withdrawn completely from it. And those states are Indiana, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Louisiana. And these other states, some of them are in the process of withdrawing from it. Some have paused the implementation of it. Some have downgraded or completely withdrawn from the national tests, but have kept the standards. And some have just modified the standards. So it's hard to have a set number of states that have it or don't, because a lot of them have it, but maybe with modifications or alterations to it. But there are a number of states who have withdrawn completely and gone back to their own original standards. Now, Common Core is often thought of as curriculum, when in reality it's just a set of standards. And there's a big difference between standards and curriculum. Standards, which is what Common Core is, standards state what each student is expected to know at each grade level. For example, by the end of 7th grade, a student should be able to draw, construct, describe geometric figures. They should describe relationships between them, and they should be able to solve real-life problems involving angle measures, area, and volume. And standards, again, they don't give curriculum for how to get to this, but they simply state what each student needs to be able to do and be able to know at the end of each grade. And that's what Common Core is. Curriculum is the day-to-day skills teachers use to teach students to the standards. And curriculum involves the classroom work, homework, classroom activities, and everything that has to do with in the classroom and what the teachers actually use to teach the students. And this is a local decision. It's not a federal level decision, and the curriculum is made by teachers, administrators, and school boards. Again, the curriculum is made in light of the standards, so they want to be able to achieve the standards for the students through the curriculum, but the curriculum itself is left up to a local decision and to each individual school. So again, Common Core, it gives standards, it does not give curriculum. According to their official website, the standards are research and evidence-based, clear, understandable, and consistent, aligned with college and career expectations, based on rigorous content and application of knowledge through higher order thinking skills, built upon the strengths and lessons of current state standards, and informed by other top performing countries in order to prepare all students for success in global economy and society. Again, this is according to their official website. Many people would disagree with this, but this is what they state that the standards are. Now, I'm going to examine arguments for and against it because it is extremely controversial right now. So advocates for it, probably the best argument they make is that Common Core is internationally benchmarked, which means that we are able to accurately compare with other countries because we have this set of standards that we're able to compare. While before, it was hard to compare, it's hard to compare education without standards or testing. So these standards give us an idea of where we sit in comparison to other countries in hopes to improve our ranking when we can see where we sit with other countries. It also provides national continuity in education because everyone's under the same standards. And you can accurately compare between states. So not only are you able to compare with countries, but you can compare within the United States between each state. Whereas before, it was very confusing because one state would have completely different standards for each grade level as another state. So it was hard to improve and compare how the states are doing. And this is extremely nice and helpful for students who are highly mobile, so maybe military family or pastor's family or people that move a lot, because it provides continuity for each student. Before, a student, when they go into the classroom, they may be either way ahead or way behind the other students because each state does it differently. So by having this national continuity, it allows students who move a lot to have an ability to be able to catch right back up and to be on the same level as each student. It also advances equity since all students are held to the same high standard. And in turn, this closes the gap for the poor and the minority, because a lot of times those in urban areas are held to lower standards and in turn don't get a better as good as an education of those in maybe a better financial situation. So this set of standards holds everyone to the same high standard, which is good and can advance equity among all classes for education. And also, as discussed before, there's not a prescribed curriculum. And this can be really good because it kind of puts it into the teacher's hands. Each teacher knows what their students need, and it puts creativity back in the classroom because teachers feel more free to teach. They know what the students need to learn at a very basic level, but then they know what the students need, so they're able to be creative in how they present it. And again, within different states and situations, that's going to be very different, which is why it's important to understand the difference between standards and curriculum. And it allows these educators and teachers to take ownership of the curriculum because they know what the students need. It also gives local schools control while still allowing the federal government to still standardize. So they're looking to kind of get the best of both worlds. Also, they state that it's very rigorous. The accountability is placed on students because of the amount of testing and homework, and in turn, students have to take ownership of the learning. And it enhances critical thinking. The Common Core, a lot of the tests and standards, it's not multiple choice. It's not necessarily if you're a good test taker, you're going to do well. Students have to come up with their own answers and then defend the answers, which eliminates cheating and calculator work and also enhances that critical thinking where they have to come up with their own answers and not just learn how to eliminate wrong answers. So this rigor and critical thinking combined together allows students to be college ready and global economy ready. Advocates will also say that it's an improvement over earlier standards because they say it was built upon the best standards, not necessarily just the lowest common denominator. So they claim that all states will be taking a step forward. And states are asked to just adopt 85% of the standards. They can tweak 15% for their own situation. And just like any change, it's going to take patience. And teachers are needing to adjust to this, and students need to adjust to this. And it's not going to be perfect at first, but if you give it patience, they say that these standards can really work and really be good for education. Common Core gives students a deep and diverse dive, deep because it hones in on just a few key topics, which allows for complete and thorough understanding. Instead of throwing a bunch of different topics and chapters and units at them, they have a few key topics and they can hone in on these topics and really understand them. And it gives them a diverse dive because it covers multiple skills in each section. So not multiple topics, but multiple skills, which increases critical thinking and problem-solving skills. Some more arguments for it is that it generates greater visibility. There are clear and concise goals and standards, and this is across the nation. So they define what students are expected to learn. Instead of just having curriculum and books, this allows for great visibility and defines what students need to learn by the end of each grade. And then students in turn understand what they're learning and why they're learning. And this also provides improvement for teachers because professional development, which is extremely important for teachers, will improve. And it'll improve because all teachers are teaching to the same standards. It allows teachers to track progress instead of comparing their students to their peers, because again, it's a national standard. And they claim that it was designed by a diverse group, which included teachers, experts, parents, and school administrators, and all of those people understand the realities of the classroom. And they also, advocates will say that states save money because they don't need to create these tests. The tests are there and available for the states. Now, there are a lot of arguments against Common Core as well. First, in addressing the international benchmark, there's no evidence supporting the claim that national academic standards raises student achievement. So, yes, you can compare to other countries by having these national standards, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to help or improve just because you know where you stand. And this is seen this is evidenced because countries with centralized standards, they rank in the top and the bottom of education, and countries without centralized standards rank in the top and the bottom of education. Which, again, it depends how you rank them, but people opposing Common Core will look at studies that say these things. And not every nation with standards tests well. They claim that the adoption process was flawed, that it was done quickly and quietly through state boards of education, and that there was no proper notice to the public, and also no proper input from teachers and parents. Even though there may have been a little input and a little time for input, they saw that it was rushed and really pushed by politicians and the government. They say that it straddles the middle ground of education, and that states with higher standards will have to accept these lower standards, and that states with lower standards will have to accept higher standards. So they see it as not all states moving forward, but rather all states actually having to adjust, not for the better. Also, it increases the amount of time spent on testing. And this may be the biggest argument against Common Core, because there's such an emphasis on testing and standardized testing, which, if you are focusing and teaching to the test, it robs the classroom of valuable instruction time, and it also puts focus on the results instead of the learning process, which, again, a lot of parents and even teachers are very against. The standards are broad and not very specific, and it's going to take a lot of time to achieve the specificity needed for teachers to be able to know what they should be teaching. And also, high school has no regulations or content that needs to be provided. So high school, there aren't even standards for, and obviously that's a problem for high school teachers. Also, it only covers English, language arts, and math. There are no standards for science, no standards for social studies, which is obviously a problem because those are also important aspects of education. So it's hard to know what to do with those then. And it also diminishes the amount of literature in favor of informational texts. So there are more nonfiction books, and there's less literature, despite the fact that complex literature has shown to produce higher literacy understanding. So they're getting rid of the amount of literature, which in turn will have a detrimental effect on the students' learning. It's expensive. Again, both sides will argue whether it is expensive or not for states, but ultimately current materials are going to be obsolete with these new standards for each state. They're going to need new textbooks, new testing, and it's extremely expensive. It's estimated for $15 billion across states, and it's also not designed for students with special needs, which is clearly a problem. It was pushed hard by the federal government, and states don't get funds if they don't adopt it. They're collecting massive amounts of personal identifiable info on students, which is scary for people. And it's unconstitutional. There's no role established for the federal government to set state education policies. And also, it's a difficult transition. It's going to take time to implement and take time for students and teachers to adjust. And a lot of teachers are just going to leave because they don't want to adjust, and there's an added pressure for the testing. People say it should leave it to the states, and that's what's constitutional, because states better know what the students need, and that it can't be tailored to such a diverse population across the nation, and that it's instruction-based standards, so it limits how content will be taught, and it's forced to use instructional strategies that are experimental and, they claim, proven failures. And Common Core is already showing a lower student achievement, and they use Kentucky as an example of this. It also causes academic rigor early, as seen as early as pre-kindergarten. Kids are expected to be involved in rigorous academics. And it's also created on ideal inspiration and aspirations in education by people who have funding and people in better situations, and also by students who are ahead of the learning curve. So what are some alternatives for Common Core? Quite simply, just leaving it up to the states, as it was before. You could also rewrite them with improvements. You could ask for anonymous suggestions from states who gather information from local educators. So slowing down the process and allowing states to have a bigger role in this. Massachusetts has had the most success with standards that are nothing like Common Core, and that's according to the NAEP and IMSS. And you can also look towards the countries that are doing well in education, which is France and Netherlands. See what they're doing and adjust to what they're doing. So this past presidential election has a huge effect because Trump was very, very against Common Core, and he wants to get rid of it. He says Common Core is a disaster, education has to be local. And he's already assigning people for education around him that are against Common Core as well. While Hillary Clinton, well, she had not recently stated her stance clearly, but it did appear that she'd like it, as she did say, I've always supported national standards. So if she had been elected, it would be very likely that these Common Core standards would continue. Thank you for listening. These are my sources. I had 20 sources in all, and I had 31 slides.